May 14, 1796, Berkeley, Gloucestershire, England. A cramped physician's parlor. Dr. Edward Jenner stands over an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps. In Jenner's right hand is a steel scalpel. On the tip of the blade rests a drop of purulent matter, extracted minutes ago from the necrotic, blistered hand of a local milkmaid. 115 miles away, in the manicured corridors of the London Hospital for Smallpox and Inoculation, Dr. William Woodville and Dr. George Pearsons rule the British medical establishment. They are the gatekeepers of 18th century immunology. If they were standing in this rural parlor, they would laugh Jenner out of the profession. To the elite, Jenner is a provincial heretic obsessing over bovine folklore. Woodville and Pearson hold absolute monopolies on the lucrative, deeply dangerous practice of smallpox inoculation. They view the introduction of animal matter into human blood as a barbaric, unscientific atrocity. They do not realize the country physician is minutes away from dismantling their medical empire. The biological agent on Jenner's scalpel is a zoonotic pathogen, Orthopox virus bovis, Cowpox. He is about to slice open the epidermis of a healthy child and intentionally contaminate his bloodstream. Jenner believes this deliberate cross-species infection is the ultimate biological shield against the apex predator of human history, Variola major. The world outside Jenner's parlor is enduring a continuous biological slaughter. In 1796, smallpox is not an outbreak, it is an omnipresent siege. Variola major executes 400,000 Europeans every single year. The baseline mortality rate holds rigid at 30%. In pediatric demographics, the fatality rate violently spikes above 80%. The pathogen does not distinguish between the gutter and the throne. Queen Mary II of England, Emperor Joseph I of Austria, King Louis XV of France, Tsar Peter II of Russia, all stripped of their sovereign power, reduced to agonizing, liquefying deaths. The pathology is absolute. The invisible airborne virus infiltrates the host through the mucosal lining of the respiratory tract. For 12 days, it silently replicates within the local lymph nodes. The host feels nothing. Then the viremia phase ignites. The core body temperature violently spikes to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Severe myalgia paralyzes the skeletal muscles. The virus breaches the bloodstream, migrating in massive concentrations to the spleen, the bone marrow, and the basal layers of the epidermis. Microscopic capillaries hemorrhage. Macules erupt across the face and extremities. Within 48 hours, these flat red dermal lesions elevate into papules. They swell into vesicular blisters filled with opaque, highly infectious fluid. By day 10, these blisters harden into deep necrotic pustules. The viral load destroys the sebaceous glands and structural proteins. The pustules fuse together in a process called confluence, physically detaching the epidermal sheet from the underlying flesh. The agony is total. Those who survive the necrolysis are left heavily disfigured by deep, pitted scarring. The virus frequently infiltrates the conjunctiva and the cornea, rendering 33% of all smallpox survivors permanently, irrevocably blind. The human immune system fights completely blind. There is no innate biological protocol to catalog, target, or neutralize the complex geometry of the viral envelope before systemic organ failure occurs. Entire indigenous populations across the Americas have been erased by a 90% fatality rate upon initial contact. In the crowded slums of European capitals, a grim sociological protocol exists. Mothers do not officially name their infants until they contract and survive the pox. The elite physicians of London offer no cure. Their only defensive doctrine is a desperate game of biological roulette known as variolation. They actively cut the skin of healthy patients and rub live, highly virulent variola major into the wound. The doctrine assumes that dermal exposure will induce a milder, survivable, localized infection compared to respiratory inhalation. It is a lethal, unrefined gamble. 2% of all variolated patients die directly from the procedure. Worse, a variolated patient becomes a highly active vector. For weeks after the procedure, they shed aerosolized live virus, repeatedly igniting fresh epidemics in surrounding populations. Woodville, Pearson, and the Royal Society accept this catastrophic collateral damage. They tolerate the 2% fatality rate and the community outbreaks as the necessary cost of doing business. It is a calculated, deeply profitable slaughter disguised as medicine. The establishment is completely locked into a flawed paradigm. They are staring at the pathogen, trying to fight it with its own lethal strain. But Edward Jenner is not reading the approved medical texts in London. He is observing the molecular architecture of the rural dairy farms. He's tracking a statistical anomaly in the genetic battlefield. And he is about to upload a ghost into the human immune system. The London Hospital for Smallpox and Inoculation stands as a monument to medical desperation. Within its wards, Dr. William Woodville enforces a draconian biological protocol known as Variolation. It is the only approved defense mechanism against the sweeping Variola major epidemics, and it is a nightmare of iatrogenic risk. Physicians deliberately carve deep incisions into the arms of healthy patients, forcibly implanting live, highly virulent pustular matter extracted from active smallpox victims. The medical establishment operates under a deeply flawed hypothesis. They believe that bypassing the respiratory system and forcing a localized dermal infection will consistently yield a benign strain of the disease. The data proves otherwise. The Variolation protocol intentionally induces a systemic viral infection. Patients suffer severe febrile episodes. Their bodies erupt in hundreds of lesions. A rigid 2% of all variolated patients die directly on the operating table or in the recovery wards. Their internal organs liquefied by the very procedure meant to save them. Worse, the London elite completely ignore the epidemiological fallout. A variolated patient becomes a highly infectious biological vector. They shed aerosolized variola major particles for weeks. Every time Woodville inoculates a wealthy London merchant, that merchant returns to the public squares, sparking secondary clusters of fatal smallpox among the unvaccinated underclass. The Royal Society accepts this continuous artificial transmission loop as a necessary mathematical sacrifice. To question variolation is to question the absolute authority of the London medical elite. 115 miles west, in the damp pastures of the Berkeley Vale, a rural physician refuses to accept the math of this slaughter. Edward Jenner is dismissed by the metropolitan elite as a provincial amateur, but his scientific pedigree is lethal. He trained under Dr. John Hunter, the most ruthless, empirically driven anatomist in Europe. Hunter drilled a singular mandate into Jenner's mind. Observe the biological reality, abandon the theoretical doctrine. Jenner is a master of anatomical observation. He has already secured a fellowship in the Royal Society for dissecting the parasitic nesting habits of the European cuckoo. Now he turns that same microscopic scrutiny toward human virology. Jenner identifies a glaring statistical anomaly in the genetic battlefield of Gloucestershire. The valley is heavily populated by dairy farms. Amidst the continuous waves of Variola major sweeping through the countryside, one specific demographic remains completely untouched. The milkmaids. They do not die, they do not scar. They walk through active smallpox clusters with absolute inexplicable immunity. The rural folklore attributes this invulnerability to a minor occupational hazard, cowpox. In the virological taxonomy, it is orthopoxvirus bovis. It is a zoonotic virus endemic to bovine herds, presenting as inflamed vesicular lesions on the udders of cows. During the friction of milking, the virus transfers through microabrasions in the skin of the milkmaid's hands. Jenner catalogs the pathology of cowpox with cold precision. The human host develops a mild fever. Solitary, localized pustules form on the epidermis of the hands and wrists. The localized inflammation resolves completely within 8 days. There is no systemic viremia. There is no respiratory distress. There is no necrosis. The human immune system easily isolates and neutralizes the bovine pathogen. But the secondary effect is staggering. Once a human survives this mild, localized cowpox infection, their immune system becomes an impenetrable fortress against the apex predator, Variola major. Jenner cross-references decades of medical records. He tracks the life cycles of dairy workers. The correlation is absolute. He compiles the empirical data and formulates a deeply radical hypothesis. Intentional, controlled inoculation with a benign animal virus will confer permanent cross-species immunity against a lethal human pathogen. He submits his preliminary observations to the gatekeepers of science. He bypasses the folklore and presents raw biological data to the Royal Society, detailing the exact mechanics of trans-species immunity. The rejection is immediate, absolute, and steeped in academic arrogance. The president of the Royal Society, Sir Joseph Banks, dismisses Jenner's findings as rural superstition masquerading as science. In London, Dr. Woodville and Dr. Pearson view the proposition with outright revulsion. The prevailing medical dogma dictates that human and animal physiologies are completely insulated systems. The very idea of extracting necrotic fluid from a diseased bovine and intentionally slicing it into the bloodstream of a human child is not just considered unscientific. It is denounced as a dangerous, repulsive heresy. Woodville guards his Variolation empire with bureaucratic hostility. He controls the hospital, he controls the data, and he controls the lucrative fees generated by the desperate London elite. A country doctor claiming to cure the deadliest disease in human history, using the pus of infected cattle, threatens to dismantle the entire foundation of their medical authority. The Royal Society refuses to publish Jenner's papers. They order him to abandon his bovine theories before he destroys his own minor reputation. They lock the doors of the establishment, fully expecting the heretic to retreat to his pastures. They severely misjudge their opponent. Denied the approval of the elite, Jenner resolves to bypass the theoretical debate entirely. He will not ask for their permission. He will force them to watch a live, lethal demonstration. He needs an undeniable biological crucible. He needs a subject, and he needs a blade. The orthopox virus genus operates as a biological dreadnought. Under an electron microscope, the virus appears as a massive brick-shaped particle, roughly 250 nanometers in length. It carries a dense core of double-stranded DNA comprising nearly 200,000 base pairs. Unlike most DNA viruses that must penetrate a host cell's nucleus to replicate, pox viruses carry their own transcription machinery. They breach the cell membrane and immediately establish localized replication factories directly in the cytoplasm. Variola major utilizes this autonomous architecture to overwhelm the host. It replicates with catastrophic speed, outpacing the immune system's ability to recognize the threat, resulting in the systemic viremia that liquefies human organs. Orthopoxvirus bovis or cowpox belongs to the exact same genus. Genetically, the two viruses share highly conserved structural geometries. The surface glycoproteins, the outer molecular scaffolding of the viral envelope, are virtually indistinguishable. To the human immune system, the two pathogens look identical. This is the phenomenon of antigenic mimicry. However, the bovine variant lacks the hyperlethal virulence genes of smallpox. It is an attenuated payload. It possesses the necessary biological hardware to enter human epidermal cells and initiate replication, but it cannot trigger a systemic, fatal cascade. When the infected scalpel breaches the stratum corneum of the human epidermis, it initiates a highly choreographed cellular war. The cowpox virus docks with local skin cells, fusing its envelope with the host membrane and dropping its viral DNA into the cytoplasm. The human body's innate security grid detects the foreign protein structures instantly. Macrophages and neutrophils swarm the localized dermal wound. These specialized white blood cells swallow the viral particles through phagocytosis, attempting to digest the invading pathogen. They release a sudden flood of inflammatory cytokines, triggering the mild fever and localized papule formation Jenner observed in the Gloucestershire dairymaids. But this localized biological skirmish is entirely secondary to the true defensive objective, the extraction and transmission of data. Dendritic cells, the intelligence gatherers of the immune system, infiltrate the infection site. They consume the viral proteins, tear them apart using proteolytic enzymes, and mount the fragmented viral peptides onto their own cellular surfaces. These dendritic cells immediately migrate away from the dermal battlefield, traveling through the lymphatic vessels to the nearest lymph nodes. They carry the exact molecular blueprint of the invading pathogen. Inside the lymph nodes, the adaptive immune grid powers up. The dendritic cells present the viral fragments to naive CD4+ helper T cells. When the precise geometric match is made, it triggers massive cellular proliferation. The helper T cells unleash chemical signals that activate the heavy artillery of the humoral immune response, the B lymphocytes. The B cells undergo rapid clonal expansion, transforming into plasma cells. They begin synthesizing highly specific immunoglobulins, IgM and IgG antibodies. These Y-shaped protein structures flood into the bloodstream, designed to lock perfectly onto the surface antigens of the Cowpox virus, entirely neutralizing its ability to bind to new host cells. Simultaneously, CD8 cytotoxic T cells deploy, hunting down and destroying any host cells already compromised by the viral replication factories. Within 8 days, the human immune system utterly annihilates the cowpox infection. The localized pustule scabs over, the active plasma cells die off. But a critical microscopic remnant survives. A fraction of the activated B cells and T cells convert into long-lived memory cells. They retreat into the bone marrow and the lymphatic tissues, entering a dormant hypervigilant state. They retain the precise three-dimensional geometry of the viral envelope. They represent a permanently uploaded database of threat recognition. This invisible molecular memory is the engine of Jenner's cross-species immunity. Because cowpox and variola major wear the exact same molecular armor, the human memory cells cannot differentiate between the benign bovine virus and the lethal human pathogen. By surviving the localized, low-threat cowpox infection, the human immune system unknowingly generates the exact antibody profile required to destroy smallpox. If variola major ever attempts to breach the respiratory tract of a previously inoculated host, the memory B cells will instantly detect the familiar surface proteins. The immune system will not require 12 days of blind replication to mount a defense. The memory cells will instantly reactivate, unleashing a devastating, immediate flood of neutralizing IgG antibodies before a single smallpox lesion can form. The virus will be neutralized in the bloodstream before the host even registers a fever. Jenner does not merely want to heal a disease. He intends to permanently rewrite the biological software of the human race. The scalpel slices into the dermal layers of James Phipps's left arm. 2 half-inch incisions breach the stratum corneum. Edward Jenner presses the purulent matter, extracted only minutes prior from the necrotic hand of dairymaid Sarah Nelms, directly into the open tissue. It is May 14, 1796. Jenner steps back, withdraws the blade, and binds the wound. The biological payload is in the blood. For the next 2 weeks, Jenner meticulously records the physiological response hour by hour. On day 7, Phipps reports a mild ache in his axillary lymph nodes. On day 9, the boy develops a slight chill, a loss of appetite, and a low-grade fever. A solitary vesicular lesion forms at the exact site of inoculation. It is a textbook presentation of orthopox virus bovis. The boy's innate immune grid is aggressively engaging and neutralizing the attenuated bovine pathogen. By day 10, the fever breaks completely. By day 14, the localized pustule hardens into a dense scab and detaches from the epidermis, leaving a minor localized scar. Phipps is entirely asymptomatic. His internal organs are completely untouched. To the medical establishment in London, this phase of the experiment proves absolutely nothing. Woodville and Pearson would view a mild localized infection of animal matter as a parlor trick, an exercise in rural superstition. Jenner knows the only metric that matters is absolute, impenetrable immunity against the apex predator. He cannot simply claim the boy is protected. He must prove it through trial by fire. Jenner waits exactly 48 days. He allows the primary inflammatory response to completely subside. He gives the boy's adaptive immune system the precise chronological window required to catalog the molecular data, undergo clonal expansion, and establish deeply entrenched memory cell lines in the bone marrow. July 1, 1796. The parlor is prepared for the Crucible. The experiment enters its lethal phase. Jenner does not bring cowpox this time. He stands over the 8-year-old boy holding a lancet saturated with highly virulent, live variola major. The biological matter was harvested directly from a local patient dying of a severe active smallpox infection. If Jenner's hypothesis of antigenic mimicry is incorrect, he is committing premeditated murder. He is intentionally infecting a healthy child with a pathogen that currently holds a rigid 30% mortality rate and an 80% pediatric fatality rate. Jenner presses the steel blade into Phipps's arm. He makes several minor punctures and one deep, jagged incision, aggressively working the live variola virus into the child's vascular system. The deadliest biological agent on Earth is now freely circulating in the boy's bloodstream, bypassing the respiratory mucosal defenses entirely. Jenner locks the boy in the house and begins the death watch. The standard 12-day incubation period commences. Under normal pathological conditions, the Variola major virus immediately seeks out the local macrophages, hijacking their cellular machinery to initiate massive, unchecked viral replication. It prepares to overwhelm the lymphatic system, spike the core temperature to 104 degrees, and systematically liquefy the basal epidermal layers into confluent sheets of necrotic blisters. But the boy's vascular system is already heavily armed. The memory B lymphocytes, generated and perfectly calibrated during the cowpox exposure weeks prior, detect the structural geometry of the variola surface glycoproteins. The molecular match is instantaneous and flawless. Before the smallpox virus can breach the host cellular membranes and establish localized replication factories, the memory B cells reactivate. They undergo rapid clonal expansion, transforming into plasma cells. A massive, overwhelming flood of highly specific IgG antibodies saturates the bloodstream. The immune response is immediate and violently efficient. The antibodies lock perfectly onto the variola viral envelopes. They physically bind to the surface proteins required for cellular docking, chemically paralyzing the pathogen. The virus cannot attach to the host cells. It cannot fuse its membrane. It cannot replicate its DNA. Simultaneously, roaming CD8+ cytotoxic T cells identify the heavily neutralized viral clusters and systematically dismantle them. The biological siege is completely broken in the blood before it can even reach the lymphatic nodes. Day 5 passes, no fever. Day 8 passes, no myalgia. Day 12, the absolute biological threshold for systemic smallpox viremia, comes and goes in total silence. The boy's basal body temperature remains perfectly stable. The puncture wounds on his arm heal cleanly, showing only the standard localized inflammation of a minor mechanical laceration. No macules erupt on his face, no papules elevate on his extremities, no pustules form. There is no necrosis. The boy is entirely completely bulletproof. Jenner refuses to rely on a single data point. He waits an additional month. On rigorous, unyielding empirical grounds, he subjects Phipps to a second direct inoculation of live Variola major, this time introducing the virulent matter into both arms simultaneously to ensure maximum viral load. The result is identical. The boy's immune system immediately shuts down the pathogen with zero systemic symptoms. Jenner opens his medical ledger. He requires no complex theory to explain what has just happened in his parlor. He documents the timeline, the viral source, the dates of inoculation, and the subsequent physiological stability of his patient. He writes a single, devastating sentence that instantly invalidates 3,000 years of blind medical suffering and condemns the London establishment's Variolation empire to death. No disease followed. In 1798, Edward Jenner forces his data into the public domain. He self-publishes a 75-page manuscript titled An Inquiry into the Causes and Effects of the Variolae Vaccinae. It contains 23 meticulously documented case studies, exact dates of inoculation, and 4 highly detailed color plates illustrating the specific anatomical progression of the cowpox vesicle. The empirical math is entirely undeniable. Jenner bypasses the closed doors of the Royal Society and delivers the molecular blueprint for human immunity directly to the global medical community. 115 miles away, panic grips the London Hospital for smallpox and inoculation. Dr. William Woodville and Dr. George Pearson read the inquiry and recognized the immediate existential threat to their medical empire. A rural physician has just rendered their entire variolation monopoly biologically obsolete. They face total professional and financial ruin. The establishment elite realize they cannot suppress the data. They must aggressively co-opt the procedure, brand it as their own, and maintain their absolute control over the London populace. In January 1799, Woodville acquires his own sample of cowpox matter from an infected dairy herd in Gray's Inn Lane. He rapidly initiates a mass clinical trial of Jenner's protocol within the walls of his own hospital. He inoculates over 500 patients in a desperate bid to mass-produce the vaccine lymph and positioned himself as the true pioneer of the eradication effort. Woodville completely ignores the most fundamental principle of biological quarantine. He executes these cowpox inoculations inside of medical facilities heavily saturated with aerosolized Variola major. He processes the benign bovine virus mere feet from overcrowded wards filled with active, highly infectious smallpox victims. The hospital airspace is a microscopic war zone of shedding virions. The medical instruments are poorly sanitized. In his arrogant rush to steal the glory, Woodville catastrophically cross-contaminates his supply. The cowpox lymph mixes directly with live, hyper-virulent Variola major. The biological reality asserts itself within days. Woodville's inoculated patients do not develop the solitary localized benign vesicle Jenner documented. Instead, their basal body temperatures violently spike. Their skeletal muscles paralyze. Hundreds of red macules erupt across their torsos and extremities, rapidly elevating into confluent, necrotic blisters. It is full-blown systemic smallpox. Woodville has injected the deadliest pathogen on Earth directly into the bloodstreams of 500 people under the guise of vaccination. The clinical trial devolves into an artificial epidemic. Patient 0 of Woodville's trial dies in agony. Rather than admit to his catastrophic clinical negligence, Woodville immediately weaponizes his own incompetence to destroy Jenner's credibility. He rushes his corrupted data to the London press. Woodville publishes reports of a series of inoculations for the Variole vaccine, aggressively claiming that Jenner's methodology is completely flawed, highly dangerous, and biologically indistinguishable from the brutal variolation procedures of the past. Woodville asserts that cowpox naturally produces systemic lethal pustules, Dr. George Pearson simultaneously launches a hostile bureaucratic takeover. He establishes the original vaccine POC institution in London, completely excluding Jenner's name from the charter. Pearson deliberately strips the intellectual property from the country doctor, positioning the London elite as the sole arbiters of the new science, while Woodville actively poisons the well of public opinion. The societal backlash is instantaneous and vicious. The London elite successfully bury the biological truth beneath a mountain of manufactured hysteria. Anti-vaccine propaganda floods the capital. The clergy denounce the transfer of bestial matter into Christian blood as an unforgivable offense against God. In 1802, prominent political satirist James Gilray publishes a highly circulated caricature depicting terrified hospital patients physically sprouting miniature cow heads from their infected wounds. The smear campaign is absolute. The public rejects the cure. The death toll from Variola major continues its relentless, unchecked climb. Jenner does not retreat to the pastures of Gloucestershire. He marshals his empirical data and mounts a brutal, systematic counteroffensive against the establishment. He drives to London and forensically audits Woodville's clinical environment. Jenner isolates the precise mechanical failure. He identifies the cross-contamination of the lancets and the fatal aerosolized saturation of the hospital wards. Jenner publicly deconstructs Woodville's methodology piece by piece, proving beyond all doubt that the lethal pustules were the direct result of Woodville introducing active smallpox into the wounds, not the cowpox virus itself. Jenner wrestles control of the biological supply chain away from the compromised London hospital. He isolates pristine, uncontaminated cowpox lymph. He dries the purulent matter onto glass squares and ivory threads, creating the first stable, transportable vaccine matrix in human history. Jenner bypasses Pearson's fraudulent institution entirely, mailing the uncontaminated vaccine directly to independent physicians across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. He relies entirely on the ruthless, undeniable math of survival to crush the smear campaign. The elite have deployed fear, bureaucracy, and sabotage, but Jenner unleashes a biological shield that simply cannot be argued with. The smear campaign collapses under the absolute, undeniable math of human survival. By 1801, over 100,000 people across Europe have received Jenner's uncontaminated cowpox lymph. The mortality rate for the vaccinated population during active Variola major outbreaks drops to absolute zero. The London medical elite find themselves screaming into a void. The global aristocracy, military commanders, and heads of state completely ignore the bureaucratic hysteria of Dr. William Woodville and Dr. George Pearson. They look directly to the country doctor in Gloucestershire. The geopolitical adoption is ruthless and unprecedented. In 1805, Napoleon Bonaparte orders the immediate mandatory vaccination of the entire French army, completely neutralizing smallpox as a tactical variable on the European battlefield. In 1807, the Royal Bavarian government enacts the first compulsory civilian vaccination law in human history. The British Parliament, entirely bypassing the protests of the Royal Society, votes to grant Jenner £10,000 to mass-produce the biological shield. The establishment is forced into a humiliating, unconditional surrender. Woodville's lucrative Variolation empire crumbles. He is forced to abandon his lethal practices and adopt Jenner's pure cowpox protocol before his death in 1805. Pearson's fraudulent vaccine institute is eclipsed by the global demand for the authentic Gloucestershire lymph. Edward Jenner never attempts to patent the vaccine. He does not monetize the exact molecular mechanism that saves the human race. He spends the remainder of his life in a relentless logistical campaign, shipping dried cowpox matter on silk threads and glass plates to India, the Americas, and the Pacific. In 1803, the Spanish crown launches the Balmas expedition, a massive global healthcare mission utilizing live human carriers. A continuous chain of 22 orphan children, sequentially vaccinated at sea, to transport the active cowpox lymph across the Atlantic to the Americas, the Philippines, and China. Jenner transforms a localized biological anomaly into the first planetary defense grid. The biological echo of the Berkeley Parlor alters the trajectory of the human species. Jenner did not simply cure a single disease. He discovered the underlying architectural principle of acquired immunity. He proved that the human immune system is a programmable matrix. By isolating the concept of antigenic mimicry, he provided the exact tactical blueprint for every immunological victory to follow. The eradication of polio, the suppression of measles, the containment of tetanus, every single vaccine deployed in modern medicine is a direct descendant of the blade that sliced into James Phipps's arm. The elite spent centuries trying to fight the pathogen with primitive, deadly gambles. Jenner recognized that the true battlefield was the genetic memory of the host. The final devastating tally requires 184 years to finalize. The biological war that began with a dairymaid's blister reaches its absolute conclusion on May 8, 1980. Inside the Palais des Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, the 33rd World Health Assembly signs a formal resolution containing a single, world-altering declaration. Variola major is officially eradicated from the face of the earth. An apex predator that executed an estimated 300 million human beings in the 20th century alone is permanently removed from the natural environment. The complex viral geometry that liquefied emperors and erased entire indigenous civilizations is reduced to a few microscopic samples locked inside maximum security biosafety level 4 freezers in Atlanta and Novosibirsk. It is the first and only time in human history that a pathogenic human disease has been entirely annihilated. The gatekeepers of the 18th century medical establishment demanded theoretical conformity. They protected their lethal monopolies and mocked the rural physician who dared to look outside their manicured London corridors. They believed the microscopic world obeyed their academic decrees. But biological reality does not care about the arrogance of the elite. It only responds to the ruthless empirical truth. Edward Jenner bypassed the bureaucracy, weaponized the fundamental mechanics of the mammalian immune system, and permanently destroyed the deadliest enemy the human race has ever known.